Joining me now with his thoughts is Tom Mulcair. He's our CTV News political commentator and the former leader of the NDP. Tom, good morning. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, Marcia.
All right, so lots going on yesterday with that tense caucus meeting. What exactly was achieved?
I don't think a lot has changed. There's strong pressure now, not only from caucus, because when you have more than 20 people asking you to step back from your function as prime minister and leader of the party, then you're in deep trouble. But now we're being told that grassroots organizers, people who are in the Liberal Party, are going to be taking this up as of next week. So I think that the pressure is going to be, frankly, unbearable for Trudeau. I know how strong-willed he is and what a strong leader he's been on in many respects, but that willfulness could actually turn into a big problem for the party that he's headed since 2013, because he was already there for a couple of years before he was finally elected as prime minister. It's really going to be a problem, Marcia. I don't see an easy exit for him. One of the gracious things he could do would be to pull on that emergency brake that we call, prorogation. You essentially suspend Parliament for a time and you give people a chance to organize some form of leadership to replace him. And he'd probably like to stick around till 2015 so that little plaque under his painting in the gallery says Prime Minister from 2015 to 2025. So if he makes it into, next January, he's accomplished at least that. But I think that he's hurting his party now. I mean, he's got to start thinking about them and the future. There are a couple of really strong cabinet ministers, of course, who would run. Very strong people from outside. We learned this week that Christy Clark is very interested in the job and has been taking French lessons to be able to be up to the task. Mark Carney, of course, doesn't need French lessons because he speaks it quite well, but he's also somebody with a great track record who would be interested. So it's not for want of people, but Trudeau's got to understand that his time is up. So far, he's not listening, but I do think that there are enough people telling him the same thing that he's going to have no choice.
Okay, so if, Tom, then he were to prorogue Parliament, are you telling us that would be a signal that he is going to step aside, not trying to just take a break and work with the party and rebuild their faith and trust?
No, he can't rebuild their faith and trust when he remains 22 points behind in the polls. People understand that this isn't a one-off. It isn't a rogue poll by one polling company that has an axe to grind against the Liberals. This is all polling companies, all polling firms across the country telling them the same thing. It's going to be a slaughter for the Liberal Party if he remains leader. And he, I guess, is having really a lot of trouble understanding that it is personalized around him. So it's less about the long-standing Liberal brand that's gone through ups and downs. I mean, they had a really tough time before Trudeau came in. They almost got wiped out when Ignatieff was the leader. But Trudeau's done an amazing job of building them back up. But what he's got to understand is, he can't be like the old French kings who would say, après moi le déluge, after me, let the flood come in because there's nothing else that matters. I've been there. Trudeau's got to have a little bit more, frankly, abnegation. He's got to step back from himself and say, okay, it's not a one-person party. It's a party with a strong history, and he knows that better than most. And he's got to have the simple recognition of the fact that he can't continue in that role. I do think, by the way, Marcia, that he's there. He can bravely say the party is strong and united, but he knows that that's not the case. And he knows that, this is the great irony of it. He says that this is all about defeating Pierre Poilievre and his Conservatives, but in point of fact, politically, the only person in Canada who can ensure the victory of Pierre Poilievre is Justin Trudeau by staying there.
Let me ask you then lastly about the announcement today from the feds on cutting immigration levels. It feels sudden. Do you feel that this is a way for Trudeau to signal that he is listening to some Canadians who want to see things scaled back, or he wants to turn the page on this whole discussion around his leadership? What do you make of it, and what do you make of the timing?
Well, this is a perfect example of where Trudeau hasn't listened in the past, because people have been sounding the alarm about the very high immigration levels. Now, most Canadians have traditionally always been pro-immigration, understanding, as we all do, that immigration is how we built this amazing country of ours. But it's interesting that for the first time, consecutive polling is showing a majority of Canadians feel that the federal government has just been letting in too many people too fast. It's not that they're against the idea of having more immigrants, but when you don't do any planning on education, on healthcare, and in particular on housing, Then you get a housing crisis that is picked up not only by average Canadians who can no longer afford rent. Poilievre's right on that. His numbers are right. Rent has essentially doubled on Trudeau's watch. So how do you explain that away? So immigration becomes the example of bad execution of policy, failure to take into account the effect on people. And what was the really serious effect for Trudeau? Young people who were the bulwark of his support that got him elected several times are now turning massively over to the Conservatives because they realize that they've been let down by Trudeau. They have less of a chance of owning a house than their parents or even their grandparents, Marcia, and they understand that that's because Trudeau wasn't paying attention to the details. He loves the grand statement, but you actually have to manage things when you're running the government, and Mr. Trudeau has fallen down on that. We've got consecutive deficits. We've got structural deficits. He's accumulated more debt than every prime minister in Confederation before him combined. And people know how to count. They realize that the federal government is having a heck of a hard time controlling expenses, and that's one of the things that's going to be his downfall. Giving somebody else with credibility on economics the chance to come in would, of course, give the Liberals at least the possibility of changing the channel in the next election.
Going to be lots of questions for the Prime Minister next hour when we hear him. Tom, good to see you. In the meantime, Tom Mulcair is our CTV News political commentator and the former leader of the NDP.